There's really no getting around it. The current Games Workshop Rat Ogre models are terrible. They're stiff and badly proportioned, and nowhere near as cool as Rat Ogres are in any of the concept art or games. Considering the ridiculous amount of hours I've put into playing Total Warhammer and how badass the Rat Ogres look in-game, it's only fair that I try to convert them. Almost all of my conversions are for 40k, but for the sake of the Rat Ogre, I'll make an exception and try to recreate the size and pose of the Total Warhammer in-game model. For the base of this build, I used a Beastman Bulgor. Its bulging muscles make it ideal, but it's unfortunately a little too small and not lanky enough. The first step to fixing that was to saw through the waist, and while it was detached, I green stuff and placed the feet from a Storm Fiend. The scale actually matches up really well. For the chest, I sliced it in half down the spine and added in a pair of sheets of PVC to broaden it substantially. I didn't worry too much about the big blank space it left in the middle of his chest, because I knew I'd later cover it up with green stuff fur. To give my bone breaker the height to match his broadness, I glued in a PVC sheet to his waist as well. The next bit was a tad complicated. Essentially, to get functioning hips, I used globs of green stuff to position his legs. The result was a little ridiculous looking, kind of like a really buff frog. This is a stage that always happens in projects, where the model is at peak derp, but I've learned you have to push through it to get to the good part. For his arms, I decided on a pair of Gorgon arms. They're lanky and muscled and kind of perfect. Much like the legs, I used globs of green stuff to connect the arm joints to get the fist-walking stance of the model from Total Warhammer. Once it was in place, I realized the arm was a little too long for his body, so I sawed off a little of the shoulder so it would work better. With his arms done, I took a step back to see how well his silhouette was matching the Total War one. Projects that have a specific outcome are always a bit tough for me because I get perfectionist with them. My Rat Ogre had subtly drifted from the stance of the original. The angles of the arms are different, for example. Mine are more hunched over than the in-game model, very simian. The in-game models are more relaxed, sort of recurved where mine are curved. But while his stance is different from the in-game model, I do kind of dig it, so the only change I made was to cut his waist so it would have a bit more of a hunched forward stance and be a little less stiff. It's not a big adjustment, but it makes a difference. For his head, I settled on this masked one from Storm Fiend. It's remarkably close to the Bonebreaker one from Total War. It has no real jaw though, so I cut off the lower mandible from a normal Rat Ogre and dry fitted it under the mask. It didn't look so good, so I decided to leave it by the wayside. I did add the pitted rhino blade from a putrid Blight King helm to the top of my Rat Ogre mask to mimic the one in-game. More as a test than anything else, I layered green stuff onto the back and shoulders of the Rat Ogre and sculpted in some fur. My method is crude, but relatively effective. Essentially, I just drag my knife in wavy lines through the green stuff and then refine it to look like clumps of fur. One of the cooler aspects of the Rat Ogres are their Frankenstein-esque embedded Skaven technology. This is apart from the Orc Flash Kits kit that looks remarkably like warpstone. I carved out the back of the right arm so that when I glued on the warpstone it would be below the muscle line of the Rat Ogre. It's a lot easier to green stuff on flesh afterwards than make a perfect cut on the bottom of the warpstone to match the arm. I attempted to do the same with the left arm to match the in-game model, but it looked pretty bad once it was glued in place, so I simply replaced it with an armor piece from the Storm Fiend kit. I don't love the Clan Skyer aesthetic of it compared to the more crude plate from the in-game model, but it helps hide the funkiness of my Rat Ogre's elbow joint. It was time to grapple with a part of the conversion I'd been putting off, my Rat Ogre's weapon arm. The problem is that almost every weapon I tried was too small. The Storm Fiend Warpstone drill and mace hand are too small. To match his size, my Rat Ogre needed an equally chunky weapon. The only one I could find is this Gorgon Bone Scythe, which originally goes with the arm, but to me it felt too long and not particularly Skaven-y. I decided to circle back to the weapon arm later, and in the meantime outfitted my Rat Ogre's back with spikes to mirror those of the in-game model. To create them, I took sprues and essentially just carved them to either look like warpstone or rusted and corroded metal, depending on how they're painted. I also sculpted fur onto the forearm of the left hand and swapped the Skyer armor to a pair I got from a War Machine Khador kit that, for some reason, has a symbol that's suspiciously close to a Skaven one. Getting back to the weapon arm, I decided to try using this Killacan drill, but it was too small. While it didn't work, it did give me the idea of simply trying to carve my own warpstone drill. I started by mixing green stuff and milliput and creating this cone. Carefully, I started carving away at it until there were no flat planes left. Once that was accomplished, I went in and started deepening the divots I'd already cut, while being careful to leave sharp bridges between the divots to get the jagged and sharp look warpstone has. It was a little too big once complete to fit the arm, so I cut it down a bit and glued it to the stump of my Rat Ogre's arm. Mimicking again the in-game model, I wrapped strips of flattened green stuff around the forearm to look like bandages. The drill was still a little too big once I connected it to the body, so I cut the divots in deeper while also arranging them to look more like the rails of an actual drill, albeit a crude one. And with that, my rat ogre was done. Though I've been referring to him as a rat ogre, technically my creation is actually more the size of a bone breaker, 10 to 12 feet at the shoulder. Either way though, I'm fairly happy with how he turned out. I'll be trying to make a few more rat ogres of a more reasonable size, so subscribe if you're interested in seeing those when they come out. I also have a Patreon where I post exclusive content, so go check that out too. Thanks for watching.